We watched every single video game adaptation we could get our hands on.
From amazing projects like The Last of Us, all the way to Super Mario Bros. Not the new one, the original one from the 90s. Ugh, that was rough.
Not very good. Video game adaptations have a complicated history. They range from amazing to good to downright awful.
So we wanted to discover more about the history of these projects. Why? Because it's pretty clear. Hollywood is obsessed with these.
From the Minecraft movie to dozens of Netflix shows, games could become the future of Hollywood.
What we've seen so far is only the start.
And it might change the gaming industry forever. And so we began the grueling work of watching over 50 video game adaptations. Now, there are way more than this if we include a bunch of animation projects and straight-to-DVD movies, but no one really cares about those. For this video, we're just sticking to the mainstream stuff. But that doesn't mean these will get any better. When I say grueling work, I mean it, because a lot of these movies are it.
Bro,
Dude,
what?
right?
Dude,
What?
Oh no!
What?
Did not age well. This is all the hours of plumbing.
To make this a little more digestible, we broke up the projects into different eras, starting with the 90s. The video game movie era began with arguably one of the most iconic games ever, Super Mario Bros., released in 1993. On all sides, this movie is a failure, both critically and commercially. From a production standpoint, it's also known as one of the messiest and most disastrous movies ever made. Like, did you know the movie started as a gritty take on the Mushroom Kingdom, but it was then rewritten to make it more child-friendly. It also had two directors that would give conflicting direction on set. What this yielded was, well, I'll just watch.
Goomba! It's not just me, right? Like, Mario and Luigi, like, their age gap feels like 40 years.
It does.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
This is going on way too long.
This dude has like a fetish.
Bowser, the director.
Dude, this is fucking nightmare fuel.
Oh!
Yeah, this movie was not great. And looking back at it now, you might think of it as a quick cash grab for Nintendo, but this wasn't the case. Nintendo got tons of pitches from mainstream studios offering a lot of money to make the Mario movie, but Nintendo didn't care about any of that. Above all, they wanted control and they wanted to make something good. But for many of the other people involved, including the actors, the project seemed like it would just be a cheesy movie for kids, just because it was based off of a video game. Pair that with dozens of production issues on and off set, and the movie failed. Nintendo was so traumatized by this experience that they didn't make another movie for nearly 30 years. But we'll get to that soon. For now, we got more garbage to watch. Now, not all companies at the time had the same mentality as Nintendo and wanting to make something good. On the complete opposite side, you have Technos Japan, who was willing to give their IP to anyone for anything.
Find me the other half now.
If you thought Super Mario Bros. Was bad, just wait until you see Double Dragon. This one sits at 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and made just a little over $4 million, which is really bad. And yeah, looking at this movie critically, it's an incredibly simple plot with amateur acting. But going into the movie with expectations as low as the depths of Zelda, it's honestly a pretty good time. Don't get me wrong, the movie is bad, but it's a fun, bad time when you're watching with some friends.
That's some classic humor right there.
Who's his budget Marty McFly looking?
It's all boom!
Like, it's keep off steroids. He's having his emotional, introspective moment.
Is this the
here.
man? Alright, alright. This is dead.
Oh, he's deduplicated
Double
himself.
Dragon.
Ah!
Okay, next we got Street Fighter the movie. Now, this one struck me as a little bit odd because I don't really remember Street Fighter having a story. I looked up some stuff and it turns out it does have an incredibly complicated lore that's run through all the games, but this movie came out in 1994 and is supposed to be based off of Street Fighter 2, which, according to Wikipedia's plot summary, is
the leader of the Shadaloo organization, M. Bison, in his global domination plan, sets up a world fighting tournament to select the best fighters to work in his Shadaloo organization through brainwashing.
sounds pretty cool. And based off the gameplay in Street Fighter, I imagine we should be getting some awesome martial arts movie.
Is that?
Yeah, that was not a Street Fighter movie. I mean, literally it is. It's called Street Fighter the movie, but it had barely any of the elements that are in the game. Sure, it had a bunch of the characters, most notably Jean-Claude Van Damme playing Guile. It also had Ryu and Ken. But as far as comparisons go to Street Fighter, that's kind of it. And that wasn't by accident either. The director of the film said he didn't want to shoehorn elements from the game into the movie, and that he didn't want to make a generic martial arts film. Instead, he described the movie as a mix between James Bond, Star Wars, and a war film. The Street Fighter movie is a pretty good example of what the main issue was with video game movies in the 90s. It didn't have respect for the original material that we would see later on. For most of the adults at the time, especially in Hollywood, video games were seen as cheap toys for kids to play. They were thought of as quick cash grabs for Hollywood, where you take a video game name, you change a couple of character names, and then you slap it onto your generic action movie, and hopefully kids will want to see it. Add in production mishaps, low budgets, and just not having a general understanding of what these adaptations should be, and you have a pretty good idea of what adaptations in the 90s were looking like. But there was one semi-bright spot that was a part of this decade.
It has begun!
Ah yes, Mortal Kombat, or what a lot of people called it for decades, the best video game movie of all time. And that's not to say this movie is great by any means. This just speaks to how rough it was for such a long time. But for a while, it was the best we had. It was a dumb, fun action movie that actually had some respect for the game itself. The idea behind the movie didn't come from a company hoping to license their property for some quick cash. Instead, it came from a place of passion. The producer for the film had some friends at Midway Games where he played an arcade version of Mortal Kombat. He immediately saw the cinematic potential in the game and started to get to work on a movie. This is far from a masterpiece, but it does one thing better than any of the other movies had up until this point. It actually takes elements from the video game and puts them into the movie. Mortal Kombat, the game, is about a fighting tournament. And the movie is also about a fighting tournament. This story was inherently cinematic, making it easier to adapt than a plumber running around a mushroom kingdom, for example. So video game movies are good now, right? Cool, alright, that didn't take too long. Time to wrap it up. Like and subscribe. Sweet, see you guys later.
Where's the Power Rangers when you need them?
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat shit.
This is...
Fight on a pyramid.
Yes.
You know.
Damn, this is acting.
It's abusive.
I know, it's fucking sucks. Oh, crap. I spoke too soon. 1997 saw the release of Mortal Kombat Annihilation. It ended up being hated by critics and fans for a number of reasons. The first Mortal Kombat worked because it took a bunch of fun elements from the games and put them into the movies, but Annihilation proved that you can have a bit too much of a good thing. They catered the movie far too much to the game itself, which provided a messy and confusing plot. Then there was Wing Commander. Yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say about that. Whew, wow, that was a lot of movies, and we got a ton more to watch. But while we do that, let's check in with James to see how this relates to the history of Hollywood.
Alright guys, I've been doing some research, and what I found out is this video game movie trend isn't really anything new. Hollywood's been doing it since its inception. We can look at some of the most popular movies in Hollywood's history, and chances are it's been adapted from something else. Alright, I want to show you guys this chart I found about the biggest movies of each decade. Check this out, okay? The 2010s were full of comic book adaptations dominating the movies. This was also a huge trend in the 2000s with movies like The Dark Knight, Spider-Man, and X-Men. Not that surprising. But if we look a little deeper, there's another trend of young adult novels being adapted, specifically from the action and sci-fi genres. You had Maze Runner, Divergent, Hunger Games, and who could forget Twilight. Now let's go a little further back to the 2000s. The chart found that the three highest grossing genres were animated, adventure, and sci-fi. And if we look at the 20 highest grossing films from the 2000s, you take away everything that wasn't adapted from a different piece of media, and you're left with more than half the films that are adapted from either a book or a comic. By the way, just a special shout out to game studios not solely relying on adaptations for their biggest games. Sure, we have a lot of superhero games, Star Wars games, but at least they're not the backbone of our entire industry. That would be remakes. Okay, that aside, these trends have been happening in one way or another every decade in Hollywood, and it's only happening more often with the rise of superhero movies and the MCU. So based off this data, I'm kind of starting to think games are going to be the next major adaptation that Hollywood takes advantage of. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but for now, I think we have some movies to watch.
All right, this decade was filled with video game movies, 17 to be exact. The 2000s started off with a bang, at least commercially, with Lara Croft Tomb Raider. This one is significant for a couple of reasons. It was the first video game movie that had mainstream appeal. It actually looks like a real movie, and it made $275 million, making it one of the biggest female-led action movies ever. The original games were also heavily inspired by movies like Indiana Jones, making it one of the most cinematic games of the 90s. And that's one of the things I'm starting to notice as I'm watching more of these movies, is that as video games started to become more like movies and became more cinematic, it also made them a lot easier to adapt. Now, don't get me wrong, Tomb Raider is far from perfect. It plays out like a B-grade action movie. The script is sloppy, the set pieces are just okay, and Angelina Jolie is still trying to figure out how to be a leading action star. But it does accomplish one thing pretty well, and that's that the movie at least looks and feels like a Tomb Raider movie. Down to the costume Jolie is wearing, the akimbo pistols, and just the overall vibe of the movie, it has a bunch of fun elements that actually respects the material. And that's one of the defining elements of this era, is that these movies are actually video game movies. A lot of the stuff we saw in the 90s felt like generic action movies slapped together as video game tie-ins, but now these projects are starting to feel a lot more intentional. You have the Resident Evil movie that has a bunch of references to the games, the Hitman movie where Agent 47 actually looks like Agent 47, and then you also have Doom, which has this super weird but also kind of awesome and really interesting first-person sequence. And please, don't come after me in the comments. I know a lot of these movies aren't good and are still pretty loose adaptations of the source material, but look at what they were working with. The games with the best stories in the 90s and the 2000s were complex RPGs with massive stories and deep characters. Games that were popular, sure, but were a lot more niche for mainstream audiences. They were closer to books when it came to their depth as opposed to movies, and as a result, they didn't get adapted. If we look at the movies of the 2000s, they were all based on action games, first-person shooters, or fighters that all had pretty lousy stories to begin with. Despite these problems facing the video game movie industry, there was one man who didn't seem to care at all. A man who might be one of the key figures in destroying video game movie reputations. I'm talking about Uwe Boll. How do you say his name, by the way?
I think it's Uwe Boll.
Uwe Boll, okay. I'm talking about Uwe Boll. The 2000s had 17 video game movies, and this guy made 5 of those. It's not totally clear why, but Uwe Boll was just obsessed with adapting video games to the big screen. He doesn't even claim to be a huge gamer either.
I hate video games.
Maybe it was just easier to get an action movie made if you could tie it to some sort of established franchise. The movies he made were often a huge mess. He'd shoot them quickly with incomplete scripts from Blood Rain, Postal, and even a Far Cry movie. These projects are generic messes that barely care about the source material. In a way, Uwe Boll is one of the main people that made Hollywood believe that video game movies might be impossible to adapt or just not worth doing. But that all started to change in the 2010s. Well, at least not right away. As we move on to the 2010s, we gotta show you quickly our one-sentence review of the 17 movies from the 2000s. But honestly, I gotta take a break, so I'll let Stu handle these.
One sentence review.
I hate you. I hate you so much. You know how many movies I watched? Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. Angelina Jolie did a pretty good job there. You know, I didn't hate it. I feel like there are a lot of nerds who are like, oh my god, the polygonal boobs are real. Oh my god. Resident Evil. It's not Resident Evil without laser hallways and jump kicking a dog, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. The movie's insane. Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life. Is that the name? Like, I forgot it already. The punching shark is crazy. She like loses her, I think she's leaving a cave and they like fuck her over and like puncture her oxygen for like basically no reason. And she's like, I gotta leave. So she punches a shark and the shark's like, all right, you can ride me. All right. And then they ride it up. And then she also turns back time. House of the Dead. This is bad. This is a bad movie. What they thought was a good Easter egg was just during scenes, it would just cut to the game. Resident Evil Apocalypse. This is the beginning of when the Resident Evil movies go really crazy, and it's not good. This is when they go absolutely awful. Alone in the Dark, totally off the wall, bonkers. It's Uwe Boll. I swear to God, he's never played a game or read a book. Doom. I didn't see Doom, but
I can take this one. All right. Let me jump in here.
Finest performance by Mr. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Can you smell what Doom is cooking? Because I could, and it was pungent. But full credit for the completely over-the-top first-person
yeah,
scene.
I've heard of the first person
Kind of saved the
scene.
movie for me. Yeah,
Damn. Blood Rain. Uwe Boll strikes again. I mean, look at these fucking scenes. It's insane. It's insane. When you edit this, it's fucking insane, dude. Silent Hill. This was actually one of the good ones. Again, I don't know what it is with 2000s. They don't like to stick to the story, but it's good. It's actually pretty good. Pyramid Head's great. DOA, Dead or Alive. I can't tell if the video game or the movie is hornier because my god. Like they're literally fighting in the rain in bikinis. At one point they climb up a tower and they have to work together and like they grab the belts so their butts show and shit. Like it's crazy. You know DO is actually a fighting game? None of you knew that. None of you. Resident Evil Extinction. This is the best one so far, I think, because it felt they're in the desert. I think it's a great atmosphere. And there's zombie crows, which was pretty cool. Postal thinks it's satire, but it's not. It's just bad. Hitman. I don't know if a bald white dude just shooting a bunch of people has aged well, but the it's not good. I was gonna be nice, but it's not that great. In the Name of the King and Dungeon Siege Tale, Jason Statham kicking not orcs. There's so many cuts. It's another Uwe Boll, so I think he was just happy to have Jason Statham. Far Cry. It's not an adaptation. I don't know what Uwe Boll is thinking, man. Stop boxing your critics and make a movie, bro. Max Payne. This one's weird. I kind of liked it. It might just be me or the fact that I've seen like 8 Uwe Boll films in a row. Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li. I didn't even know this movie existed, and I really wish I didn't.
Now we're on to the 2010s. Unfortunately, this decade didn't see a huge amount of improvement compared to the 2000s, but there were a couple of key differences. One of them was that it was incredibly refreshing to have actual movie stars in these adaptations. The 2000s really only had Angelina Jolie and Mark Wahlberg as major stars in these movies, but the 2010s were full of legitimate celebrities. You had the perfect Persian man, Jake Gyllenhaal, in Prince of Persia. That's a joke, by the way. Aaron Paul in Need for Speed. Hell, even The Rock was in an adaptation for Rampage. This extra star power brought on bigger budgets and as a result made more money at the box office. The first 3 movies in the 2010s made more than all the movies of the 1990s did combined. But why were these movies making so much more money all of a sudden? And why were the studios willing to spend more?
Well, guys, Hollywood is controlled by pretty much one thing, and that's money. Harry Potter was one of the most popular books in the world before it was made into a movie, and Superman and Batman were probably the most popular characters in the world before Hollywood decided to make movies about them. The same was true for games. Games were always popular, but the late 2000s, which influenced the movies we would see in the 2010s, became bigger than ever. Do you remember when we started hearing the phrase biggest entertainment launch of all time when new games came out?
It's a video game that is shattering sales records.
That is to say the least. Modern Warfare 2 is selling like hotcakes.
The game made almost $1 billion in sales.
Yeah, first time I remember hearing it was with Grand Theft Auto 4. In just 24 hours, that game earned over $300 million. And it would take the game just a week to earn $500 million. That's more than most movies earn in their entire lifetime. And then this happened a year later with Modern Warfare 2. And then in 2013, Grand Theft Auto took back the crown. And just to be clear, when I say the biggest entertainment launch of all time, I'm not just talking about games here. These numbers are being compared to books, television, and yeah, even movies. Meaning that in the late 2000s, video game revenue was far surpassing films. This is all to say that games are a massive industry, and Hollywood took notice. All of a sudden, bigger studios with bigger budgets and bigger actors were all interested in video game adaptations in hopes that they could take a piece of the video game money pie, essentially become the best-selling book adaptation of the modern day.
Okay, that's all good and fine, but let's be real. A lot of these movies were still missing something. Most of them just weren't very good. Sure, they had the video game references and gave some love to the material they were adapting, but oftentimes they were filled with sloppy scripts and lousy action. This happened for the majority of the decade until a turning point happened with 3 movies that came at the end of the 2010s, and that's Tomb Raider, Rampage, and Detective Pikachu. These movies were far from masterpieces, but they were perfectly enjoyable blockbusters. The main reason why they all worked is that they focused on being good movies above all else. Similar to how the MCU got rid of a lot of the cheesy tropes we saw in superhero movies, the movies at the end of this decade didn't necessarily focus on following the often mid-video game stories we see, but instead took the elements of the games that worked while focused on making a good movie. They were also developed as big-budget blockbusters that were trying to appeal to the masses instead of quick cash-ins for children. These 3 movies combined made over $1 billion. This happened during a time where AAA video game storytelling was maturing as well. You had The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption 2, and God of War. Games that oftentimes were telling better stories with richer characters with more emotional depth than most movies. With the rise of mocap technology and games having the ability to be more cinematic, the storytelling was being taken more seriously as well, and so were the adaptations surrounding games. These 3 movies started to build some momentum and give signals to Hollywood that video game adaptations could be so much more than what they were in the past. We were finally starting to get some hope in video game adaptations. But before we get to that, 1 sentence review.
Oh yeah, Tekken. Harada is one of the creators of Tekken, and he had a quote for the movies. I think he said, "This Hollywood movie is terrible," and he said it was fucking awful. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time with the perfect Persian man, Jake Gyllenhaal. Resident Evil Afterlife is more zombies, more shit, more what's her name? Mila's Jehovah's Witness. Resident Evil Retribution. No retribution, no redemption. Just taken out to the back like a zombie and shot in the head. Silent Hill Revelations. Now, what I do remember about this one is that it's not as good, and it took a while to come out, and everyone was really hyped for it, and it just kind of fell off. Post Breaking Bad, Aaron Paul decided to go for Need for Speed, which is kind of crazy because it needs to stop. Hitman Agent 47, they got a new actor. It's not Timothy Olyphant. Oh, Rupert Friend. Rupert Friend's my fucking enemy after watching this piece of crap. Honestly, this is bad. Warcraft. Oh, this movie, I feel like people really wanted it to be like a good movie, and I did too, and it's not. I think Warcraft is the most disappointing one out of all of these because it looked good. You'd expect Blizzard to like step it up, but I think this was the start of the fall of Blizzard. Assassin's Creed is just full of ass, you know? Assassin's Creed, Michael Fassbender, Ubisoft. Resident Evil, the final chapter is finally done. Finally, Mila, you can rest in peace. Oh, thank God. Oh no! Oh no! Yeah, new Tomb Raider games, new Tomb Raider movie, and it's good. It's pretty good. I feel like people are finally starting to get like what makes these things passable. I'm not gonna say great, I'm gonna say passable. Yeah. Rampage, oh my God, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is back, baby. Yeah, it was good, it was good. I mean, like, fun CGI, it's a dumb, fun summer blockbuster. Pokemon Detective Pikachu, Ryan Reynolds is actually pretty funny. There's some great Pokemon references in there. There's an underground Pokemon fight ring. Insane that someone pitched that. I really enjoyed it. Is that it? No more movies? Oh, thank God. Taylor, let me leave, please. I've been in this dark room for days.
After a 30-year struggle, video game adaptations are actually pretty damn good now. And I say adaptation because this was the decade where video game TV shows started to rise. You got The Last of Us, Fallout, and Twisted Metal, which are all solid to amazing television shows. And in the case of The Last of Us, it might be one of the best TV shows of the last 5 years. And of course, we have the Super Mario Bros. Movie and Sonic. Those were some of the most fun times I've had at a theater. And it doesn't stop there. You also have Gran Turismo, the Castlevania series, Arcane, and a bunch more. These projects aren't just bringing in gaming fans either, they're for everyone. Each of these projects takes a couple of different elements of what has worked in the past. They all have solid budgets with big stars and respect the source material. But there are some new reasons as to why these adaptations are so much better than they've ever been.
Okay, so I've been wondering why these adaptations are so much better, and I think I figured it out. This video game adaptation boom boils down to 3 different reasons. Now, we could look at the larger scope of multiple video game projects, but I think the best way to explain this is The Last of Us series on HBO. I think it has pretty much all the elements that help explain why these projects are just so much better. And the first one is the creators behind the show, Neil Druckmann, one of the original creators behind The Last of Us game, signed up to help showrun. This means he was a part of every story beat. He looked over every script and helped with nearly every creative decision on the show. With games feeling more cinematic, Hollywood has opened up the doors to some of the creatives making these games. This was after Neil attempted to write a Last of Us movie for nearly a decade, but just could never make it work due to the limits of a 2-hour runtime. Which brings in the next reason why these adaptations are so much better, and that's due to the rise of TV. As we've looked past the past 30 years of video game movies, it's pretty clear that 2-hour summer blockbusters might not be the best medium to tell these stories. Most video game stories take a minimum of 8 hours, and that's on the shorter side. The Last of Us takes around 12 hours to beat, and sure, a lot of that is sneaking around, killing clickers, but huge chunks of the game are filled with rich character moments and plot points, and that just can't be done in a 2-hour movie. It also helps that in the past decade, TV has gotten way bigger budgets. This has allowed studios to be able to bring video game worlds to life. The Last of Us would have looked a lot more like the lower budget The Walking Dead if it was made in 2013. But TV has matured, and it's happened right as games are ready to be the next big franchises. The Last of Us also brought on a ton of people who are familiar with the game. Craig Mazin, the second showrunner for the HBO show, was a massive fan of the Naughty Dog title. He was so inspired by it, he wanted to make the TV show for the game, and because he was a massive fan of the franchise, he was able to make creative decisions that made sense, but also helped enhance and change the story in meaningful ways. And this is likely going to continue happening with other adaptations in the future. With games becoming a bigger part of culture, there's a good chance that the people involved in these projects have played the game and at times maybe even fell in love with it.
Woo! The future of video game adaptations is incredibly exciting. We got tons of TV shows and movies coming out and being announced almost weekly. Hideo Kojima is working on a project that is looking to fuse gaming with movies in some way, and maybe we'll finally, somehow...
Time to make it rain with your body parts!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The Borderlands movie is finally out, and Jiminy Christmas, it's atrocious.
I mean, of course it's awful. Did you really expect me to say something different?
Borderlands is 102 minutes of complete, unmitigated dog feces.
Borderlands. You had to ruin this video, didn't you? Listen, I'm gonna be real with you guys. We started working on this video like 6 months ago. We were like different men back then. Stu got engaged. James has grown a mustache and got really into bouldering. I ran a marathon. And when we started this video, we thought Borderlands was gonna be pretty good, if not great, or at least okay. But as I'm sure you know, that did not happen. And it's kind of frustrating because it had most of the pieces that should make a great video game adaptation. It had the creators involved, it had a star-studded cast, at a decent budget. Even Craig Mazin was the original writer of the movie, until he asked for his name to be removed just a couple weeks before it came out. Weird. So this movie should have at least been okay, but it's resulted in one of the worst critical receptions for a video game movie ever. It's sitting at like 10% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, and it just totally bombed at the box office as well. I watched it last night, and I don't know if the 10% is fair, but the movie is pretty terrible. It's just kind of empty and soulless. You can just tell they're kind of phoning it in each and every scene. The action isn't interesting. It's also just not funny at all. Like, not even a funny in like a, oh, that joke didn't land kind of way. It's just kind of like a not funny and you weren't even trying kind of way. And it just kind of betrays the goofy spirit that the Borderlands games are known for. And don't get me wrong, sometimes the Borderlands games can just go way too far in this direction, and their humor can borderline on cringy a lot of the times, but at least they're trying, which I can't say is the same for this kind of movie. Overall, it was just incredibly boring and dull. So where does this whole video game adaptation trend go from here? Honestly, I'm really not sure. After watching all these video game adaptations, I wish we could just give you guys a clean and simple answer, but I don't think that's really the case. Just like any adaptation or any movie or TV project, some are going to be amazing and some are going to be awful. But I do think it's fair to say that these projects overall are improving. At least at the end of the day, Uwe Boll is out of this whole picture. As long as he's out, I'm at least hopeful for the future of video game adaptations. And if there's money, Hollywood is still going to be making these projects, so I don't see them going away anytime soon. And if we somehow get a Avengers-like Smash Bros movie, then these decades of awful movies will all be worth it. And speaking about Smash Bros, if you guys want to learn more about that community and the rise and fall of it, then go ahead and click on the next video. We've all worked super hard on these videos. I hope you guys like them. Please like and subscribe, share with your friends. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.